Welcome everyone to today's Synergist Product Demo Webinar, Cority's Industrial Hygiene Software, How to Use Your Data to Demonstrate the Full Value of Your IH Program. I'm Ed Rakowski, Editor-in-Chief of the Synergist, the magazine of the American Industrial Hygiene Association. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and especially Cority for sponsoring this webinar. Today's product demo is scheduled for 30 minutes, and we'd like to reserve some time for questions from the audience. So I'm going to very quickly introduce today's speakers, Baldry and Erin Snyder. Sean is a product marketing manager responsible for Cority's health and safety solutions. He is a Canadian registered safety professional, and he has over 15 years of experience working in occupational health and safety in the construction, mining, and manufacturing industries. Erin Snyder is a certified industrial hygienist with over 19 years of experience with deep expertise in workplace exposure assessments. As senior pre-sales engineer at Cority, Erin is an internal subject matter expert for the industrial hygiene product line. And now I'll turn the presentation over to Sean and Erin.
Great, thanks Ed. And before we get started, I just wanted to say on behalf of Cority, I wanted to extend my thanks to AIHA for the opportunity to showcase our platform and really to demonstrate to the attendees today how they can try to generate value out of their industrial hygiene program at their respective organizations. So what I thought we would do to start is simply introduce ourselves to those on the webinar who may be unfamiliar with who Cority is. Cority's been offering its subject matter expertise within the EHSQ space for over 30 years, helping industrial hygiene professionals, like many on the call, optimize their productivity and better manage operational risks within their workplace. Now, during that time, we've been able to assist upwards of 1,200 organizations across 70 countries optimize use of their IH data to reduce occupational injuries and illnesses and support achieving ever higher levels of operational excellence. And one of the reasons why we believe we've been so successful at helping organizations achieve their IH program goals is that our solutions are designed, developed, and continuously supported by EHSQ professionals, many of whom have worked in the same organizations and in the same roles as our clients, and I would expect many people on the call today. And it's this aspect of knowing what it's like to walk in your shoes, essentially, which ensures that we feel that we can build the solutions that EHSQ professionals want because we would want them to. So, we really feel that that expertise and commitment to our client success that we've demonstrated over time is one of the reasons why we have some of the highest levels of client satisfaction in the industry. But enough about us. What our presentation focuses on today is how organizations can use their data more effectively to create real value out of their industrial hygiene program. So I thought we'd start by talking about what's going on in the EHSQ space in general that's changing the way organizations approach industrial hygiene, and perhaps influencing how IH professionals address risk within their business. And while certainly there's many factors that are influencing how IHs work, I think these four, or the four on the left, are most prominent, and I'll just walk you through each. So the first is declining investments in IH. We can see in a lot of cases that EHS budgets are tightening in general, and unfortunately often IH needs are deprioritized over what some would argue as being more tangible immediate risk. And what I mean by that is it follows the adage of what bleeds leads. So it's not uncommon to see an organization attention being put disproportionately on incidents like slips and falls because they're very tangible and they're very immediate. And unfortunately, occupational illnesses that derive from some of the risk factors that industrial hygienists investigate on a daily basis are deprioritized, and that causes some degree of concern. The second issue revolves around the shift that we're seeing in organizations towards an EHSQ generalist approach. So we are seeing a lot of organizations streamlining their EHS departments, and this leads to EHS generalists taking on and subsuming more of these traditional IH functions, or inversely, industrial hygienists becoming more responsible for a greater scope, placing more strain on their ability to prioritize risks, manage their time, and remain efficient, and certainly a concern for a lot of professionals out there. The third trend that we're starting to see is this a shift toward greater operational complexity. So this is where organizations are becoming more complex, specifically around their data and their system integrations, but also through the introduction of emerging technologies when you think of things like nanotechnology or 3D printing as an example. And those in turn are introducing unique, novel hazards to the workplace. And at the same time, we're seeing increasing regulation in some specific sectors, which is emphasizing the need for IH expertise. And finally, we have this idea of big data, and this comes up a lot, but what we're talking about here is really organizations are collecting more data than they've ever had. But the question that we have is many organizations are struggling to manage that data volume and that data structure and really to derive value out of it. So, these trends are thus creating some very tangible challenges for the frontline IH professional. So the first is, how do I demonstrate value that the industrial hygiene program provides to the organization? And what we're talking about here is really, how do we translate IH value into the language of the business? So, EHSQ professionals, we said this in the past, that they need to learn how to describe their domains or their subject matter expertise in a way that helps the organization achieve its primary goals, which is typically returns on investment, whether that's through illness avoidance or stronger compliance or brand protection, what have you. But that's one of the fundamental challenges that we're seeing with industrial hygiene in the context of these declining IH investments in many organizations. We're challenged with how do we improve our efficiency. With IH professionals charged with greater scopes of responsibility, they need tools and systems that will enable them to be more efficient and arguably more effective. The third point is, how do we offset competency gaps? So we talked a little bit about the shift toward a generalist approach and this increased operational complexity, but how do we manage that with generalists assuming more of these traditional IH responsibilities with perhaps less than adequate technical expertise? We need to equip those individuals with solutions that support them achieving those program goals while offsetting those competency gaps. And finally, back on this concept of big data, how do we take that big data and translate that into meaningful insights? So, the shift toward big data, we need to be able to find ways to quickly and easily aggregate and assimilate those disparate data sets to be able to analyze them to provide meaningful insights that supports good decision making and that helps inform how we set priorities and how we allocate resources. So staying with this idea of big data for a moment, it's interesting to see how we're seeing a growing shift in how organizations are approaching data analysis or data analytics. Whereas most organizations now tend to adhere to a descriptive or diagnostic analytics approach to data, whereas they're looking at small subsets of available data, and they're using it to create a picture of what happened and why. And what's interesting is we're seeing growing investment in software solutions to enable organizations to shift away from those initial modes and to shift toward a more of a predictive analytics approach. And this is where we take historical data, this is your EHSQ and your other business data, and we aggregate it and input it into machine learning or natural language processing algorithms to provide a prediction of what's likely to happen in the future. And by understanding what will likely happen, we're better able to influence those outcomes early to prevent occupational illness. And what I think is unique here is the shift is especially important in industrial hygiene when we consider the introduction of new equipment like smart sensor technologies that are drastically increasing the amount of data volume that we have. So if you think about it in the past, an industrial hygienist might collect, let's say 7 or 8 measures in a sampling activity. Now with direct reading instruments, they're dealing with 7 or 8 measurements every second. So again, this increased data, this increased data set is providing more accuracy, but it's also increasing our workload to analyze that data to provide meaningful insight. So organizations that are taking notice of investments in software or taking notice of those investments in software as a prerequisite to play in this analytics sandbox. And what's interesting is a recent survey conducted by NAME reported that a majority of respondents agreed that investments in software are necessary to really leverage these emerging technologies that are coming forward. So I'll end there. I just wanted to provide a brief context to what we're seeing in the IH space, and we're going to spend the rest of our time walking through a solution to demonstrate how software solutions can help improve your efficiency, can eliminate waste in your work cycle, and how you can leverage your data that you collect every single day within your IH program to better identify where risk could lead to loss within your business, and to help inform decisions on where to spend time and money. So at that, I'm going to flip the floor over to my colleague, Erin, and from that point, she'll walk you through the solution.
Okay, thank you, Sean. I'm going to go ahead to the next slide. Okay, perfect. So for this portion of the presentation, let's go ahead and set the stage with a scenario. And that scenario being this. So the AHS department has identified that there's been an increase in occupational hearing loss claims, and the hygienist now is being tasked with identifying underlying cause for those STS, and more importantly, to identify what actions need to be taken to prevent additional hearing loss. Okay, so what we're going to explore today is how the hygienist can use Cority for this particular scenario. So we'll look at being able to view where in the organization those standard threshold shifts have been reported. And Cority users can take advantage of an HR interface. And what that would allow users to do is not only see, a job title, but also a location, a department, a site, a building, which would be helpful, again, in just being able to categorize or organize where those are occurring. We will also look at evaluating related risk assessments for this particular scenario around hearing loss, creating monitoring plans to be able to track employee exposure, and then once we've gathered our data, being able to assign follow-up actions as needed. So they may be additional controls that need to be put in place, or maybe those controls just need to be assessed or updated. Maybe it's PPE assignment or it's training. And then lastly, being able to confirm employee enrollment in appropriate similar exposure groups. So for this scenario, it would also include the hearing conservation program. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to begin with, what I wanted to show you is a dashboard in Cority. So this is a screenshot. I realize it's small. You can't see all of the details that are here on the dashboard, but what we're going to do is kind of break out some of these pieces and take a closer look at them, so you'll be able to see them a little bit better. But what I wanted to convey here is being able to optimize the data that you have available to you right when you log in. So when Cority users log in, they are taken to dashboards, an example that we see here. And I can see essentially what data has already been gathered, what's already been done, as well as kind of where I need to act as well. And it's just, like I said, it's there immediately upon logging in. And then the higher level metrics that are shown, and we'll walk through an example of this as well, you can drill down into them to see specific individual records and associated data and so on. Okay, so next slide. Where I wanted to begin, I wanted to start with discussing leveraging a unified solution. Okay, so we all know that industrial hygiene is just one component in a comprehensive EHSQ program. If you're using an integrated system like Cority, this is going to help promote sharing of data across your different teams. Okay, so leveraging data from other teams. So the indicator from the dashboard that we're looking at right now is showing me jobs where we've had a work-related standard threshold shift. This is coming from occupational health. I may also have some risk data that comes from safety as well, but what this is helping me do as a hygienist is anticipate where I need to focus noise dosimetry going forward. Okay, so as a hygienist, I'm not actually seeing these audiometric test records. That's typically HIPAA information, just that would reside with occupational health, but this does help me tremendously know which jobs that we've seen some type of occupational hearing loss. Okay, next slide. All right, so from there, what I'm then going to do is focus on a risk-based approach. So I'm going to use risk assessment data to be able to determine, and so for the table on the far left, what we've done is we've got a list of which jobs have already been evaluated. They've been categorized for risk, and then there's a risk value or a number that's associated with the risk for that particular job. You'll see that they're color-coded, so just at a quick glance, if there was certain numbers or certain categories that I wanted to focus on, I could certainly do that. But I saw in the information coming from occupational health that the machine shop is one of the areas where we're seeing increase in STSs. So that's where I'm going to focus. And so I want to look now at my risk assessment for that particular job. So what I can do from the dashboard is click and open that machine shop record. And then the kind of the record on the right is that risk assessment piece. So that's part of the risk assessment tool. And I can also see in looking that there's a chemical hazard there as well, toluene, but I'm focusing on noise. And so I can see that what risk assessment's already been done, which again just helps me anticipate where my exposures may be occurring. And ultimately, I can prioritize from here. Okay, so where do I need to focus? Where do I need to focus my time, my attention, my resources, and my budget, which is big. And then I can build sampling plans from here. And those sampling plans then are based on risk. It's not necessarily a best guess strategy any longer. So I know that when I was in the field, this would have been very helpful. Oftentimes you kind of know in your head which areas are the worst, or some kind of, it's kind of tribal knowledge among the team. Which areas are the worst or which machines are the loudest, but really until you evaluate it, it really is still a best guess. Now, from here, if you want to take it a step further, kind of going back to the integration with occupational health, you can make these risk records available for viewing by your nurses and clinicians. So essentially what that would mean is when they see an employee in the clinic, and maybe it's for their annual surveillance exam, they would be able to see which jobs have already been evaluated by industrial hygiene and what the risks associated with those jobs are. What that means for the clinic side, the occupational health side, is determining that they have employees in the right similar exposure groups or compliance programs, okay, which again can lead to cost savings. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so continuing with our risk-based approach. So I have started with my STS data, trying to determine and anticipate which jobs are potentially the highest exposure. I've then looked at and done some risk evaluation, and now I'm going to build sampling plans. I'm going to actually go out and collect the data from here. So I'm going to leverage data to create a focused evaluation. Like I said, rather than a scattered approach, it's risk-based decision. I know what it is that I'm looking for, saving time, saving money. And I'm going to concentrate on those areas or tasks that have shown to be highest risk, okay? So as I am doing the monitoring, within Cority, you can monitor survey progress. You can set targets. You can determine if your timelines are being met that you establish. And then as far as displaying the data that's being captured in the center, and again, I know it's kind of difficult to see because it's small. This is a breakdown of noise, TWA, and each of those lines, those gray bars that we see, is a different seg, a different similar exposure group. And so it's taking the data that I'm capturing, it's categorizing it into different segs, and then again, it would help me be able to see kind of which groups of workers are at higher risk. On the far right, the pie chart, this pie chart is showing jobs where we have noise exposure over some type of threshold. This example is a 50% dose, but it would be, again, whatever matters most to your organization. But again, it's taking the data that we've collected, the job that's linked to that particular exposure, and breaking it down in the pie chart. And then at the bottom, oh, sorry. Thank you. At the bottom, just one last indicator to speak to, and that is being able to show exposure trends, so trend lines over time. This is really key to your program, It's a chance for you to show what you are doing is working. So I can see over time that our trend line is going downward. That's a good thing. Our noise exposure over time going downward. And then you can share this information with other stakeholders as well. Okay, thank you, Sean. You can, okay. All right, so now that we've evaluated risk and we've captured a lot of information, a lot of data, now we want to evaluate our results. So what I've included here is a screenshot of some of the our noise monitoring samples. Okay, so I can see sample number and where it was collected, and then kind of the traffic light in the center is the exposure range. Again, color-coded for different exposure ranges. The way that the data is presented is it's in a searchable format. So I can search by the different column headers if I wanted to filter by a certain job or a certain location or site, for example. I can certainly do that. What this allows me to do is mine large data sets for very specific information. So maybe it's a specific threshold. We're showing exposure range here for noise, but maybe it would be something like % of OEL, for example, where you can take, again, large data sets, filter it by location, by threshold, and narrow it down to the areas, the samples that you are most concerned with. Okay, so you can easily manage data from multiple sites. So for those of you that are managing multiple locations, you can have all of your data in one place. So this is a big time-saving component for hygiene. You don't have to request data from various sites. You don't have to spend time collating, documents from your different hygienists in different locations. And it makes the data very easy to access. So if you have a request from an employee, maybe they say, what has my noise exposure been in the last 10 years? You can use this information, use the data, filter for the employee, search by the employee, and then you would have a listing of all of the samples related to that employee for whatever time range you're looking for, okay? In addition, if you are approached by legal counsel or a regulatory agency where you need to very quickly access your exposure data, you can do that here within Cority. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so we've captured, we've done a risk evaluation, we've created a sampling plan, we have captured a lot of data in the system. What are we going to do from here? What we want to do next really is track any kind of follow-up that we need to do. So on the far left, you'll see a table and it says open action items. This is just as it says, it's any kind of follow-up or corrective action that's open, okay? You notice again, we have color coding in red, those are all overdue. So that's definitely where I want to focus my attention immediately, is make sure we get those closed out. And you can use the system for, I should say you can leverage the system for alerts and notifications. So you can alert the employee what's been assigned to them, what that specific control is, or maybe it's additional monitoring that needs to be done, or a PPE questionnaire that needs to be filled out. And you can also notify them when their due date is approaching, as well as escalate. So for these shown in red that are clearly overdue, I would have wanted to escalate those maybe to a supervisor and just be able to close the loop and make sure everything is being addressed in a timely manner. Okay. We can also be able to track or use monitoring data to determine PPE efficacy. So kind of in the center, the table in the bottom, where it says employees with potential for inadequate hearing protection, I can see the employee, I can see what hearing protection it is that they're wearing, what's been assigned to them, and their effective exposure. So if there's something that doesn't look right here, then I may need to reevaluate what PPE it is that the employee is wearing. Okay, and then up above the number, the 166 count of records, you can do things just as simple as, how many people do we have enrolled in the hearing conservation program? And maybe I want to break this down by different locations or different sites. You can certainly do that as well. But what this is helping to do is make sure, again, I have employees in the right PPE and they are in the right SEGs or right surveillance program. If you can avoid unnecessary testing, exams, clinic visits, and everything that goes along with that for employees who don't need to be in these programs, it is definitely a cost savings, okay? And their enrollment is being confirmed by the data that you are capturing. Okay, the last one I wanted to mention here on this slide on the far right, if you wanted to maybe take a step further and introduce a new program, a hearing fit testing program, Cority can accommodate that as well, and then you can manage any related data for that program. So this table is just showing the employees that are due for fit testing. And maybe that's something I do once a year, once every 3 years, you know, whatever, however you're going to set up that program. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this slide I just wanted to give you an example or show what the automated notifications can look like. So I mentioned when you are setting up and tracking corrective actions or follow-up of some type, that the employee who is being assigned the action will receive a notification. And that can be via email, which you see on the left, or it can be via SMS text message, which you see on the right. And both will include what's been assigned to them, when it's due, and so on. But the idea is that it's shared quickly and it accurately, and it can be tracked to completion. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so lastly, and the last piece I want to touch on is within kind of business intelligence as a whole. So let's say through the course of my investigation into our increased rate of standard threshold shifts, I decide it would be helpful to me to be able to visualize where the exposures are occurring in real time. Okay, so I have a table and it's showing me, the jobs, which is fine, but I manage multiple locations, multiple sites. It would just be helpful for me to be able to visualize. So I can set that up using what we call a query builder or a query writer within Cority. And what it is, it's a very flexible tool that allows the hygienist to decide what data you want to pull into a report and then be able to visualize on a dashboard. Okay, and so you'll see the different columns: effective exposure, employee, SEG, and so on. I would select that information, what I'd like to see here, and then because I want to be able to visualize different sites, you'll notice I have coordinates listed, and as well as the location or the site. And then on the far right column where it's color-coded, I've done some assignment of colors based on, again, a threshold of some type, a % dose. I will say that you do not need to know how to code to do this in Cority. As a hygienist, I don't have time to learn how to code, and so this works off of a drag and drop. So on the very far left, you'll see where it says noise samples, and there's a bunch of listings underneath that. Those are all the different fields and data that I can pick from, and I drag and drop, and I decide where I want to put it and kind of how I want that to look. Okay, so it's just a very flexible tool to help me create indicators that I need that's going to help me visualize. So Sean, if you'll please go to the next slide. What I'm going to do after I've kind of created that report and picked the data that I want to see, what I've decided here is that I'd like to see it on the map. Okay, so I want to see in real time as that data is entered, it's going to pop up on the map at the corresponding location or site that I'm responsible for. Okay, and then I take that map, and the next step, follow the arrow, is to put it onto my original dashboard. So that again, when I log in, I can see, do we have kind of hotspots, so to speak, where we're seeing, increasing numbers of these popping up, and it's all available to me right here. I can then click on those little color-coded arrows, and it's going to show me the information that was in that report that I put together, all of those different columns, so I can see the corresponding data. Okay, but the idea here again is being able to configure the data that you've captured to meet your needs, to make the data personal. It's up to you on what's most beneficial to you and to your program and what you need to see immediately upon logging into the system. Okay, Sean, I'll turn it back over to you.
Sure, thanks, Erin. I realize that we've come up against probably our allotted time, but just a few final points quickly that I wanted to reinforce, specifically around analytics and insights. So, we talked a lot about how you can manage your data within the system. to be able to manage those workflows and ensure that you're being as efficient as possible. But again, getting back to this idea of not simply organizing your data, but really linking those data sets around that complete unified platform is going to be very, very beneficial for the organization to really understand where to focus their efforts. And what we're displaying on the screen here is an example of a new solution that it will be released from Cority shortly called Core Insights, which essentially leverages a lot of this continuous predictive modeling that provides those automated insights to the user. So instead of having to search through the system, you could click on a particular module or record and a light bulb icon will appear, and you can click on that and it'll give you insights into your data that might not be immediately available to you, which we feel is going to be immensely helpful for the frontline practitioner. And as a final point, we wanted to reinforce as well that, at Cority, we recognize that IH professionals need tools that allow them to work within the context of how work is actually done. So, when you think about having to go out and take notes or measurements from the field, only later to have to go back and manually enter that data into a system is not only inefficient, but it causes unnecessary workflow backlogs, it creates errors, and all the things that could be avoided. So in our product development cycles, we're certainly putting a lot of attention around how do we increase engagement through mobile technology. So we have a mobile-first strategy with our My Cority mobile application that you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen. And this immediately allows you to do everything or soon everything that's currently in platform, to do it through any sort of smart device that you have. And really the idea here is to put the power of the platform in the hands of the doers and really to recognize that work is done in the field, so the tools that you need have to be field-based as well. So that brings us to essentially the conclusion of our presentation. I just wanted to remind everybody that joined that you can find more resources about Cority and certainly how we can assist in augmenting your industrial hygiene program at www.cority.com. You can certainly reach out to Erin or I, and we'd be happy to assist in any conversations that you might have or any needs that you might have. And lastly, I just wanted to again thank AIHA for the opportunity to showcase our platform and to really have a good, fruitful discussion around how do we extract value out of our IH program. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Ed.
Great, thanks, Sean and Erin. We are a little bit over right now, but a couple of questions did come in, and if our attendees are able to stick around for a couple more minutes, I'd like to at least get these couple of questions read. The first question is, early in the presentation, it was mentioned that organizational shifting toward a generalist approach may result in people taking on IH responsibilities without adequate technical expertise. Can technology really offset these technical gaps that IH professionals train extensively for?
I'll take that one. So thanks, Ed. Excellent question. I'll respond first, and Erin, feel free to join in as CIH. I would say we have to be careful about that. I think what we try to describe in terms of the value that technology brings is optimizing workflow is one of the best ways that we can assist maybe a generalist that doesn't have extensive experience with industrial hygiene to truly understand what are the key steps that have to be taken in order to manage an IH workflow. So, Erin talked a lot about, the typical anticipation, recognition, assessment, and control methodologies that we typically use in industrial hygiene. So I think we wanted to follow that and provide tools that simplify that for the generalist, but also to be able for them to then identify when a specialist is needed. So, we're all managing limited or increased workloads. We're all managing limited budgets. So to have a tool that enables a generalist to say, this is where I need additional assistance, and this is, I think, the tools and some of the knowledge that I have suffices. So I don't know if it can actually replace it, but I certainly think it can help the generalist streamline where that specialized expertise is actually required.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sean. And then the last question I'd like to get in, it was mentioned that IH needs tend to be deprioritized when competing against more immediate risks like slips and falls and lacerations or broken bones. How can software help C-suite leaders better understand why industrial hygiene is just as important as managing those more immediate risks?
Okay, I'll take that one on as well, and Erin, feel free to join in. But I think here, it's about knowing which data to show, right? And being able to link the activities that we do within industrial hygiene on a daily basis. And getting back to my earlier point, is aligning that to the key business drivers within the organization. So, you know, we'll take the noise example that we used within this demonstration as an example. So, noise, you know, it might not mean anything to a C-suite executive, but money does, right? So what we have to do is translate how technology can help us manage those potential outcomes better, and then how that affects those direct and indirect costs that actually hit the organization. Because in a lot of respects, the reason that occupational illnesses don't register as equally important maybe as with some senior leaders is because it's not immediately tangible, right? And yet they're often some of the most costly claims or costly injuries that we have. So being able to quantify that value through showing how, you know, investing in some of those proactive measures within industrial hygiene workflow will cost money to the organization, but it greatly offsets the direct and indirect costs that are associated with not just, you know, dealing with that illness, but then also the replacement workers and all the things along that step. So I think, you know, it's trying to optimize the value of IH within that greater scope, and again, is really showcasing to the senior organization that these tools allow me as an industrial hygienist, potentially with greater responsibilities, to be more efficient. That means that I can manage risk more effectively, I can ensure compliance, and that all has a bottom line driver for the overall organization.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sean. That is all the time we're going to have for today. My thanks to Sean Baldry and Erin Snyder for their presentation, to Cority for sponsoring today's webinar, and to all of our participants. Please keep an eye out for announcements of future Synergist webinars, and have a good day.
All right. Thank you, everyone. This actually concludes today's webcast. Thank you all for attending. The recording will be available at AIHA.webevent.tv. We will send all registrants an email tomorrow with this link. And please visit our event calendar to sign up for future webcasts.